He thought my silence was surrender, a sign of my broken spirit. He had no idea it was the sound of a woman sharpening her sword. The coppery tang of blood was a taste I knew too well. It bloomed on my tongue, a bitter flower, as I lay on the cold bathroom tiles. My jaw throbbed with a dull, familiar ache, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my marriage. Through the half-open door, I could hear him, Mark, moving around the kitchen, the clink of a glass, the rush of water from the tap. For him, the storm had passed. For him, it was over. He'd released the pressure, the rage that had been building all week over some imagined slight, and now he was calm. He was always calm afterwards. This time it was about his car keys. I'd moved them from the ceramic bowl by the door to the hook just inside the pantry, thinking it was a safer spot, a more organized spot. That was my mistake. Thinking. He'd come home, ready to go out with his friends, and the keys weren't in their spot. The search began calmly, then escalated into a frantic, accusatory whirlwind. "Where did you put them, Sarah? Why do you always move my things? Do you do it on purpose just to make my life difficult?" I found them, of course. I showed him the new hook, my voice trembling as I tried to explain my simple, logical reasoning. He just stared at the keys dangling from my fingers, his face a mask of thunder. He didn't want a solution. He wanted a target. The back of his hand caught me across the mouth, sending me stumbling backwards into the hallway table. The fancy vase our friends got us for our wedding shattered on the floor, just like the last vestiges of my hope. He'd stepped over the ceramic shards without a word, grabbed his keys, and slammed the door. He came back 2 hours later, smelling of beer and false remorse. He didn't apologize. He never did. Instead, he'd tried to help me clean up the mess, his large hands suddenly gentle as he picked up the broken pieces. "Be careful, honey. Don't cut yourself," he'd murmured, as if the blood already drying on my lip was from something other than him. That was the routine. The explosion, the violent release, and then the eerie, suffocating calm where we pretended to be a normal, happy couple. I was expected to accept his silent, non-apology. I was expected to cry, to let him hold me and whisper that things would be better, that he was just stressed. I was expected to forgive. But tonight, something inside me had snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clean break, like a frozen branch in winter. As I pushed myself up from the bathroom floor, my reflection in the mirror was a stranger. A woman with a swollen lip, haunted eyes, but a spine made of steel I didn't know she possessed. I rinsed my mouth, the pink water swirling down the drain like my wasted years. I didn't cry. Not a single tear. I walked out of the bathroom and passed him in the living room. He was on the couch watching TV, a fresh drink in his hand. He looked up, expecting me to curl up beside him, to seek comfort. He expected tears. He expected weakness. He got nothing. I met his gaze, my expression utterly blank. I held it for a beat too long, long enough for a flicker of confusion to cross his face. Then I turned and walked into our bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. That would have been an emotion, a reaction. This was different. This was the absence of everything. A void. I changed into my pajamas, my movements methodical and slow. I could feel his presence outside the door, his uncertainty seeping through the wood. He was used to managing my sobs, my anger, my fear. He had no playbook for this chilling, silent compliance. Finally, the door creaked open. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice tentative. I was already in bed, lying on my side, facing away from him. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just breathed, slow and even. "Are you okay? Your lip—" He started, taking a step into the room. Silence. It was a thick, suffocating blanket I had wrapped around myself. It was my armor, my weapon. He took another step, his shadow falling across the bed. He was waiting for me to flinch, to speak, to give him something, anything to work with. I remained perfectly still, a statue carved from ice. After a long, heavy moment, he sighed in frustration and retreated, closing the door with a quiet click. I lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle. I listened to him eventually come to bed, the dip of the mattress as he lay down, the heat of his body near my back. He didn't touch me. My silence had built a wall between us he didn't know how to climb. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. The fear had been burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard purpose. A part of me had died tonight on the bathroom floor, and a new part, a far more dangerous part, had been born in its place. I finally drifted to sleep, a strange sense of peace settling over me. The first rays of dawn were painting stripes across the walls when I woke up. I felt him stir beside me. I didn't move, keeping my breathing deep and even, pretending to be asleep. I felt his weight shift as he sat up, heard the familiar groan of the mattress. There was a pause. A silence that was different from my own. It was a confused, questioning silence. Then a sharp intake of breath, a gasp, low and choked. I could feel his eyes on me, but I knew he wasn't just looking at my sleeping form. He'd seen something. I kept my own eyes shut, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of anticipation and terror. I heard him swallow hard, a dry, rasping sound in the quiet room. His eyes, wide with a dawning horror, were fixed not on me, but on the nightstand beside me. And then the color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly, chalky white. His breath hitched, a ragged sound that cut through the morning stillness. I could feel the intensity of his stare, a physical weight pressing down on me even with my eyes closed. He didn't move for what felt like an eternity. He was frozen, a predator suddenly finding itself in a trap it didn't understand. The hunter had become the hunted, and the air in the room crackled with the shift in power. I decided it was time for the performance to continue. I let out a slow, deliberate breath, as if stirring from a deep sleep. I stretched one arm above my head, a casual, lazy movement that was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Then I rolled onto my back and slowly opened my eyes, blinking as if adjusting to the light. My gaze met his. Terror. That's the only word for it. Pure, unadulterated terror was etched onto the face of the man who had shown me nothing but rage and contempt for years. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, flickered from my face down to the nightstand and then back again. I followed his gaze. There, next to my half-empty glass of water, sat two objects. The first was a small black digital voice recorder, its tiny red light glowing softly, indicating it was on. It had been on all night. It had captured the sound of the vase shattering, his venomous accusations, the wet, sickening thud of his hand against my face, my choked gasps for air. It had captured his hollow, insincere attempts at comfort afterwards. And then, it had captured hours of my defiant, weaponized silence. Beside it lay the second object, the one that had truly bleached the color from his cheeks. A pregnancy test, lying face up. Two stark pink lines screamed their truth into the quiet room. Positive. Undeniably positive. What is that? He whispered, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger, not at the test, but at the recorder. The pregnancy was a horror, yes, but the recorder was a threat. It was proof. Tangible, irrefutable proof of the monster he was. I sat up slowly, my movements calm and measured. I didn't wince, though my jaw ached. I didn't let any pain show on my face. "I think you know what it is, Mark," I said. My voice was level, devoid of the fear he was so used to hearing. It was the voice of a stranger. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape. The panic was rolling off him in waves. "Turn it off, Sarah. Turn that thing off right now." He made a move to lunge for it, to smash it, to destroy the evidence just as he had tried to destroy me so many times. "I wouldn't," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more authority than a shout ever could. He froze, his hand hovering over the nightstand. "It doesn't matter if you destroy that one. It was streaming to a cloud server all night. My sister got the link at 3 a.m., so did my lawyer." The lie rolled off my tongue as smoothly as a prayer. There was no cloud server. There was no lawyer, not yet. My sister was sleeping soundly 1,000 miles away. But he didn't know that. In his mind, the walls were closing in. The world he had so carefully constructed, the one where he was the successful, charming husband and I was the clumsy, emotional wife, was crumbling to dust around him. He sank back onto the edge of the bed, his face in his hands. He was actually shaking. Sarah, baby, like, why would you do this? We can talk about this. We can fix this. Fix this? I let out a short, bitter laugh. You mean fix my swollen lip? Or fix the fact that you just beat your pregnant wife? I let the words hang in the air, each one a separate, poisoned dart. I watched them hit their mark as his head snapped up, his eyes filled with a new kind of panic. The legal ramifications were finally dawning on him. Hitting me was one thing in his mind. Hitting a pregnant woman was a different category of crime, a brand of evil that even he couldn't justify. I, I didn't know, he stammered, the excuse already sounding pathetic to his own ears. You didn't tell me. If you had known what, Mark? I leaned forward, my voice a blade. Would you have hit me softer? Would you have aimed for my stomach instead of my head? Does it matter? You raised your hand to me. Again. Only this time, you weren't just hurting me. I placed a hand protectively over my still flat belly. This time, there was a witness. He looked utterly broken, a pathetic shell of the tyrant he had been just hours before. This was the real Mark, stripped of his anger and his arrogance, a weak, terrified little boy. He started to plead, the words tumbling out in a desperate, pathetic stream. He was sorry. He loved me. He was just so stressed from work. It would never happen again, he promised. He would go to therapy. He would do anything. I listened to his litany of empty promises, my expression unmoved. I had heard them all before. But this time, they were not for my benefit. They were for his. He was trying to convince himself that there was a way out. I let him ramble on for a full minute before I held up a hand to silence him. He stopped, his mouth hanging open, waiting for my judgment. I am leaving, Mark, I said, the words clear and final. I am going to pack a bag, and I am going to walk out that door, and you are not going to stop me. A flicker of his old self returned. You can't, he said, a hint of a threat in his tone. You can't just go. Oh, I can, I replied calmly, swinging my legs out of bed and standing up. I walked over to the closet. And I have the recording. If you so much as breathe on me, if you try to block my way, my sister has instructions to send that file to every single person in your phone contacts, your boss, your clients. I paused, my hand on the closet door, and turned to look at him. And of course, your mother. I wonder what she would think of her perfect boy. His face went impossibly whiter. The threat of involving his mother, the woman who worshipped the ground he walked on, was the final blow. He slumped in defeat. He knew he had lost. He watched in stunned silence as I pulled a suitcase from the top of the closet and began calmly placing clothes inside. I moved with a purpose he had never seen in me. He thought the fight was over, that I would just disappear from his life, leaving him to deal with the fallout. He was wrong. This wasn't just about escaping. This was about justice. As I zipped the suitcase, I pulled my phone from my purse. His eyes followed my every move. He probably expected me to call the police, or a taxi. I did neither. I scrolled through my contacts, found the number I was looking for, and pressed the call button. I put the phone on speaker and set it down on the bed between us. He stared at it as the ringing began, a look of pure confusion on his face. He didn't recognize the number. A woman's voice, warm and friendly, answered on the second ring. Good morning, Dr. Evans's office. This is Linda speaking. Mark's brow furrowed. Dr. Evans was his doctor, our family doctor for the last 5 years, a man he played golf with, a man who considered him a friend. Good morning, Linda, I said, my voice sweet as honey. This is Sarah Miller, Mark's wife. I need to make an emergency appointment for him. Yes, for Mark, as soon as possible. I paused, letting the suspense build as Mark stared at me, his mouth agape. Tell the doctor it's urgent. My husband has just woken up and he seems to be experiencing sudden and complete memory loss. He can't seem to remember a single thing he did to me last night. The silence that followed my words was profound. On the other end of the line, Linda, the receptionist, was momentarily speechless. On the bed, Mark looked as if I'd just spoken in a dead language. His mind was scrambling, trying to process the sheer audacity of my move. It was brilliant in its cruelty. I wasn't just exposing him, I was dismantling his life with surgical precision, using the very tools of respectability he held so dear. Dr. Evans wasn't just his doctor, he was a pillar of their social circle. A call from me, alleging something so bizarre and specific, was a ticking bomb placed right in the center of his carefully curated world. Memory loss? Linda finally stammered, her professional calm clearly rattled. Mrs. Miller, are you okay? Is he violent? Should I call someone for you? Oh no, nothing like that, I said, my voice dripping with false concern. I glanced at Mark, whose face was a kaleidoscope of rage, fear, and disbelief. He's perfectly calm now, just confused. He has this terrible cut on his knuckle. I looked pointedly at his right hand, where the skin was red and split from its impact with my jaw. And he can't for the life of him remember how he got it. And I seem to have bumped my face on something. We just thought it would be best to get him checked out immediately. Could you possibly squeeze him in this morning? This was my checkmate. If he refused to go, he looked guilty. If he went, he would have to sit in a room with a man he respected and either confess to being a monster or try to lie his way through a medical examination, all while I sat serenely in the waiting room, a living, breathing testament to his memory loss, with a swollen lip and a secret recording. Of course, Mrs. Miller. We have an opening at 9:15. Can he make that? Linda's voice was now hushed, laced with the conspiratorial tone of someone who knows they are handling a delicate situation. We'll be there, I confirmed, before ending the call. I looked at Mark, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips. Get dressed. You have a doctor's appointment. He didn't move. He just stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The impotent rage was bubbling just beneath the surface. For the first time, he couldn't hit his way out of a problem. He couldn't shout it into submission. I had trapped him in a cage of social decorum and consequences. You're insane, he hissed, the words low and venomous. You're a psycho. I learned from the best, I replied sweetly, picking up my packed suitcase. I walked to the bedroom door and paused. If you are not in the car in 10 minutes, I'm going to take a little walk. Maybe to the police station, or maybe I'll just go next door and have a chat with Helen. You know how she loves to gossip. I'm sure she'd be fascinated to hear my recording. That did it. The mention of our busybody neighbor, Helen, was another perfectly aimed shot. He stood up, his movements stiff and jerky, like a puppet whose strings were tangled. He snatched some clothes from a drawer, his back to me, refusing to look at my face. I had taken away his power, and without it, he was nothing. The drive to the doctor's office was the quietest we had ever shared. It wasn't the thick, angry silence of before. This was a fragile, crystalline silence, filled with the unspoken thoughts of two people who were now irrevocably enemies. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I stared out the passenger window, watching the world go by as if I were a tourist in my own life. I felt a strange sense of detachment, of calm. The storm inside me had finally passed, leaving behind a clear, cold sky. When we walked into the waiting room, all eyes turned to us. I was acutely aware of my bruised lip, of the tension radiating from Mark. I gave a weak, polite smile to the other patients, a woman playing the part of the concerned wife. I sat down and picked up a magazine, my hands perfectly steady. Mark stood awkwardly by the reception desk, unable to even look at Linda. He just mumbled his name and sank into a chair in the farthest corner, his face a mask of stone. When the nurse called his name, he flinched. He stood up and walked toward the examination rooms like a man walking to the gallows. I watched him go, then settled back into my chair. This was part one of my plan, ruining his reputation, making his world unsafe and unpredictable, just as he had made mine. About 15 minutes later, Dr. Evans himself came out to the waiting room. He was an older man with kind eyes, but today they were filled with a deep professional concern. He looked at me, then at the empty chair where Mark had been. Sarah, he said, his voice low. Could I speak with you for a moment? I followed him into his private office. He closed the door behind us. The room smelled of antiseptic and old books. He gestured for me to sit, his expression grim. Mark is very agitated, he began carefully. He's denying everything, of course. He says you fell. And the recording? I asked, my voice even. Dr. Evans sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. He says you doctored it, that you're unstable, that the stress of the pregnancy has made you erratic. He looked me directly in the eyes. Sarah, as your doctor and as a friend, I need you to be honest with me. Is what I heard on that file you emailed me this morning the truth? So my bluff about the lawyer and the cloud server had become a reality. In the 10 minutes he'd been getting dressed, I had indeed emailed the audio file to Dr. Evans with a simple subject line, concerned about Mark's memory. Every word, I said, my voice unwavering. He nodded slowly, a deep sadness in his eyes. He had known us for years, had come to our barbecues, had congratulated us on our anniversary. He was seeing the ugly truth beneath the polished veneer. I see, he said softly. Well, under the circumstances, I've taken some steps. I've told Mark that based on his reported memory loss and clear signs of extreme stress, I am legally obligated to recommend he undergo a full psychiatric evaluation. I've also told him that for his own safety and the safety of others, it is my medical opinion that he should not be operating a vehicle or machinery until that evaluation is complete. I stared at him, my mind racing. I hadn't expected this. A psychiatric evaluation. A medical order not to drive. This was better than I could have imagined. I had wounded him. Dr. Evans was providing the salt. He's in examination room 3, the doctor continued. He refused to give me his car keys. He's waiting for you. He paused, his gaze intensifying. Sarah, you don't have to go back in there. My nurse can get his keys. We can call you a cab. You and the baby. You need to be safe. The offer was tempting. To just walk away. To let the doctor handle it. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was not just to escape. It was to dismantle. I stood up, a new, colder resolve hardening within me. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate that more than you know, I said. But I need to get his keys. There's one more stop we need to make. He looked at me, confused, but didn't argue. I walked out of his office and down the short hallway to room 3. I pushed the door open without knocking. Mark was sitting on the edge of the examination table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes burning with a desperate, hateful fire. You, he spat, you've ruined me. You ruined yourself, I countered calmly, holding out my hand. The keys, Mark. He stared at my outstretched palm, then laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And what if I don't give them to you? What are you going to do? Scream? Call the good doctor back in here? He stood up, taking a menacing step toward me, his old confidence starting to return. He thought he finally had me cornered, away from prying eyes. There's no recorder now, is there, Sarah? He was right. The recorder was in my purse, but it was off. It was just the two of us. He took another step, his shadow falling over me. My heart started to pound, the familiar fear coiling in my stomach. Maybe I had pushed him too far. Maybe this was a mistake. Give me the keys, I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. Or what? He sneered, his face just inches from mine. I held his gaze, my mind racing for a way out. And then my eyes flickered to the stainless steel tray of medical instruments on the counter beside him. My gaze locked onto one object in particular. It was long, sharp, and gleaming under the fluorescent lights. My hand moved before my brain could even process the decision. I snatched it from the tray. It felt cold and heavy in my palm. He followed my gaze, his sneer faltering as he saw what I was holding. His eyes widened in shock. Or this, I whispered, raising the large, sterile syringe I had just armed myself with. Now give me the damn keys. His bravado evaporated in an instant, replaced by the same primal fear I had seen in his eyes that morning. The man who wasn't afraid to use his fists against his wife was terrified of a needle. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. He stared at the syringe, at the glint of steel and the unknown liquid sloshing inside. It was probably just saline, maybe a vitamin solution, but to him, it was a weapon of terrifying potential. He took a clumsy step backward, stumbling against the examination table. "Are you crazy?" he breathed, his eyes locked on the needle. "Put that down. You don't know what you're doing." "That's where you're wrong, Mark," I said, my voice dangerously steady. "For the first time in a very long time, I know exactly what I'm doing." I took a deliberate step toward him, the syringe held firmly in my hand like a dagger. "I'm protecting my child. The keys. Now." He fumbled in his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grasp the metal. He finally pulled them out and tossed them onto the floor, halfway between us, as if they were contaminated. He didn't want me to get any closer. "Good boy," I murmured. I kept my eyes, and the syringe, fixed on him as I bent down to scoop up the keys. I never broke eye contact. I backed out of the room slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs not with fear, but with a wild, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. I pulled the door shut, and the last thing I saw was his face, pale and slack-jawed with shock. He was finally, truly afraid of me. I walked back to the reception desk, my composure a perfect mask. Linda and the nurse stared at me, their faces a mixture of pity and awe. I placed the syringe carefully on the counter. "He dropped this," I said simply. "And Dr. Evans, thank you for your help. We won't be needing a follow-up." I walked out of that medical office and into the bright morning sun, a free woman. I didn't get a taxi. I walked to our car, my car now, and got in. But I didn't drive home, and I didn't drive to a friend's house. I knew Mark would expect that. He'd call his friends, his family, spin his tale of the hysterical pregnant wife, and try to get them to find me, to reason with me. I wasn't going to give him the chance. Instead, I drove downtown, to the towering glass building that housed the headquarters of his company. It was a place I'd only been to for sterile Christmas parties, a place where he was a respected senior vice president, a man known for his calm demeanor and sharp business acumen. I parked the car in the visitor's lot, took the recording device out of my purse, and walked into the lobby. I didn't ask for Mark. I asked for Mr. Henderson, the CEO, the head of the entire company, a man known for his ruthless business practices and his zero-tolerance policy for scandals that could affect his stock price. His formidable executive assistant tried to block me, telling me he was in meetings all day. "Please tell him that Sarah Miller is here," I said, my voice polite but firm. "I have some information regarding the mental and emotional stability of one of his senior VPs, Mark Miller. It's a recording. I believe the HR department and perhaps even corporate counsel would find it illuminating." The assistant's eyes widened. She disappeared into the inner office. 30 seconds later, she was back, holding the door open for me. I sat across a vast mahogany desk from a man who radiated power. He listened without interruption as I explained the situation, my voice never wavering. I didn't cry. I didn't plead for sympathy. I presented the facts: a pattern of abuse, a violent assault, and a clear, present danger to myself and my unborn child. Then I placed the small black recorder on his polished desk and pressed play. I only played the first 2 minutes. The part with the shattering vase, his screaming accusations, the sound of the slap, my choked gasp. It was enough. He held up a hand for me to stop. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice a low rumble, "this is a serious allegation." "It's a serious crime," I corrected him. He nodded slowly. "Indeed." He was silent for a long moment, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth. He was calculating. Not the human cost, but the corporate cost, the liability, the potential PR nightmare. "What is it you want?" he finally asked. "I want out," I said, "and I want to be safe. I want the company's full legal resources to help me file a restraining order, effective immediately. I want the lease on our apartment transferred to my name only, and I want Mark's things removed by a professional moving service by the end of the day. I want him enrolled in a mandatory, company-sponsored anger management program and psychological evaluation, not as a request, but as a condition of his continued employment, and I want a severance package." He raised an eyebrow. You don't work for me, Mrs. Miller. No, I agreed. But I'm about to be a single mother to the child of your senior vice president, a man whose violent instability you are now fully aware of. I think a generous severance to ensure my silence and my cooperation in keeping this an internal matter is in your best interest. It would be a shame if this recording found its way to a news outlet or a competitor. Think of the brand. I watched the gears turn in his head. I had him. I had appealed not to his humanity, but to his bottom line. He knew a messy, public divorce, complete with abuse allegations against a top executive, would be a disaster. My solution was clean, quiet, and efficient. It protected the company while solving my problem. He picked up his phone. Clear my schedule, he barked into it, and get HR and legal up here, now. He looked at me, a flicker of something that might have been respect in his cold eyes. You'll have what you want, Mrs. Miller. And just like that, it was done. Within hours, a team of lawyers was drafting paperwork. By the time Mark finally convinced a friend to pick him up from the doctor's office, the locks on the apartment had been changed. A restraining order was being couriered to his office. He arrived at work to find not sympathy, but a summons to a mandatory meeting with HR, legal, and the CEO. He had been outmaneuvered and outplayed at every turn. His rage had been his downfall, but my calculated, cold silence had been his ruin. I never saw him again. The company handled everything. They paid for my new life, and in return, I faded away. The story on the inside was that Mark had a breakdown, a personal crisis, and was on an extended leave of absence. Eventually, he was quietly transferred to an overseas office, out of sight, out of mind. I moved to a new city a few months later. I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. I named her Hope. Sometimes, as I rock her to sleep in our quiet, peaceful apartment, I think about the woman I used to be, the one who would cry on the bathroom floor. She seems like a stranger to me now. The night Mark hit me, he broke something inside me, but he also forged something new in its place, something hard and unbreakable. He thought my silence that night was weakness, a surrender. He was wrong. It was the sound of a woman sharpening her sword, and by morning, I was ready for war. And I had won.